Welcome everybody to a pre that special little interview with a few folks around API management and one of our sponsors for that conference here in both. Well, we just completed Texas in January and Wisconsin here in, well, days. I'm not going to play moderator. Josh will, and let me actually introduce Josh here. Josh, how are you?
I'm awesome. Hi, Clark.
I'm doing hi. Like I'm a little frazzled at the moment with everything going on, but wonderful to have your support. Wonderful to have you guys here, and I'm looking forward to sitting on the back burner with this one and listening.
Should be fun.
The stage is yours, my friend. Why don't you start with a quick introduction about yourself and where do we want to go today?
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Clark. We're excited actually to bring this group together today. So the goal of the discussion we're going to host is about API management and how this space has evolved over the last decade, and how we think it should evolve over the next few years. And we have some great folks joining us to get into this conversation about the problems with API management today, how it could be better, and things like why solutions aren't more widely adopted. So the two folks joining us are Nathan Hall, who's a principal engineer with Clearco, and Kevin Swiber, who's an API lifecycle integration specialist. He said he wanted to have the job title with the most syllables and is clearly winning right now, with Postman, who I'm sure most of you have heard of. I'll let them introduce themselves in more detail, but to start the ball rolling, actually, I'll introduce myself. So I'm Josh Twist. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Zuplo. And Zuplo's goal is to redefine API management from the developer's perspective. I'm hugely invested in this space personally, not just because I created a company in it, but I founded Azure API Management when I worked at Microsoft. I worked on APIs for analytics at Facebook for 5 years and was head of product for payment methods at Stripe just before I started Zuplo. So my whole career has been dedicated to building great developer tools and experiences with a particular penchant for APIs. So this whole subject is very near and dear to my heart. So that's a little bit about me. Nathan, it would be great if you can introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about Clearco and your experience with API management, which I know is pretty wide and varied.
Sure. So thanks for having me. So I'm a principal engineer on the infrastructure team at Clearco. And what Clearco does is revenue-based financing for e-commerce companies. So if you're an e-commerce company and you need anywhere from $10,000 to $20 million, we help fund for anything from, inventory to advertising and everything in between. I like to. A good analogy is, Shark Tank, and actually our CEO, Michelle, is on the Canadian equivalent called Dragon's Den, which is pretty fun to watch if you ever seen it. But for the past, I don't know, almost a decade, I've been doing API gateways and management within a couple different tranches, some in fintech and some in healthcare, and watched the space change a little bit over the years. So happy to share what I've seen and hopefully where we can go.
Awesome. That sounds great. And Kevin, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at Postman.
Yeah, hi. So Postman, for those you don't know, is an API lifecycle management platform. A mouthful just like my title. We've got 20 million developers, I should say 20 million folks who are using the platform on a regular basis. Lots of adoption, lots going on there in the API space. My specific role in the company is to speak to organizations about their API lifecycle, about their API platforms, the challenges they're going through to put together things like governance today, and to assemble all the tools that it takes to have a steady stream of APIs flowing through their organizations. My background with APIs goes back pretty far. Prior to my career working at API product companies, I was in healthcare, insurance, automotive, finance, and so doing roles in engineering management, enterprise architecture in that capacity. So kind of having that experience of really the boom of the API industry Until about a little over 10 years ago, I joined a company called Apigee that did API management, and was eventually acquired by Google Cloud Platform. Bounced around to a couple of other little API management startups in the meantime. So APIs and API management's really been kind of my wheelhouse for the past 10 years.
Yeah, it's excited to have these two folks together with us today. I've had some great conversations with them both about API management recently. Kevin, I met at a conference, and we shared a lot of old stories. And Nathan, we've been talking a lot about their API program at Clearco, which has been fascinating to partner up with those folks and talk about that. So actually, just to set the stage for the audience, API management can be a little bit of a nefarious. What does it mean? Like, it can be a little bit. What exactly is API management? So it'd be great to get your quick perspectives on this, given your exposure and your work in the area. So Nathan, why do businesses adopt API management? Like, you've deployed a few of these solutions in the past. Like, what were you getting out of it? Like, what was the benefit to your teams?
Yeah, I guess the underlying thing across all three companies where I've either consumed or deployed it has been we've had this internal product that management decided would be good to expose to the external customers via API. And the idea was, well, we could go do all these things ourselves, but we'd be painting ourselves in a corner and spending hundreds of thousands of hours trying to get everything deployed that you would get from an API management solution. So you think of things like authentication, authorization. You think of things like quotas and rate limiting. You think of the documentation portal. You think of and everything that comes with that. And so that's kind of how we landed it, using different API gateways. And I've tested quite a few over the years. And I've first used Apigee, which was almost a decade ago now, and then used Tyke at my previous job, and now we're starting to try Zuplo out. And there's pluses and minuses all around the different solutions you got, but that's kind of been my experience thus far.
Awesome. And Kevin, anything you'd add to that, or you'd supplement to what Nathan said?
No, Nathan, you want me to rate those gateways as you listed them? I could just go through like 1, 2, 3.
I think that's good. I think it's a good place to start.
No, I mean, so organizations have been struggling with API management since before they knew they were called APIs, right? Folks were trying to handle things in, what was it called? SOA governance. It was kind of the category before API management. So typically these are a bunch of SOAP services, right? So when I talk about working in, insurance and working in finance, lots of these SOAP services cutting edge at the time that were being introduced. API management really starts to come in when we start to take a different look at this. And even through that SOA age, we started realizing that, these endpoints are not just for integration, right? Like, there's something more to it than just integration, right? Once you are exposing this to a partner, for instance, your API starts becoming a product. And, that exposure alone has all sorts of runtime and build time implications that come behind it. And so API management has really been going along this path of APIs becoming a product, and how do we actually manage that in a meaningful, reliable way.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you kind of got into this, Nathan, about not just building it yourself. I find when I talk to customers, there's folks who get it and are using an API management solution, and there's folks who don't. They don't see the value prop, and they decide to build it themselves. So how did you think about that trade-off when you decided to use a solution?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's your standard build versus buy, internal back and forth between engineering and product. When we were looking at, I'll start with Clearco just because it's top of mind and recent. We have this internal product where if you go through Clearco website proper, you can, connect all your accounts, and as a customer we can give you financing. But we have tons of external partners that are interested in being able to control some of the life cycle and notification aspects of how they can embed this on their website. And so, outside of, the internal stuff that we had to like pull the different API pieces apart to make them accessible, there's a bunch of other concerns that you now have to start thinking about. Like, well, we can't use, our normal user login flow that we've been using. We have to think about how authentication and authorization is going to work. We want to be able to secure the backend services with, your standard rate limiting quota things. I don't want to have to go out and build a documentation portal so that these engineers that are going to be using our products are going to know exactly how to use it. What's that look like? And so when you put all those pieces together, you realize that you're going to have to hire a new team of, end developers, and it's going to cost you X million dollars per year. Or you can go out and find a solution that offers most of those things for you, so you don't have to go and build them yourself. And for me, the answer is always pretty simple, that it's a lot cheaper for us to go find a good solution that handles 90% of those use cases before we try to build it ourselves. And they do it better.
That makes a ton of sense. Anything you'd add to that, Kevin?
Yeah, I think it's not as simple as build versus buy anymore, right? I think in the early days of API management, we saw bigger tech companies, at least in the tech sector, trying to come out with their own software that sometimes they open sourced. Netflix had an open source project called Zool that was essentially an API gateway and an entire ecosystem around their OSS stuff, right? And in those days, API management really meant really big providers at the time. And so people were making decisions of, do I adopt this open source project or do I buy this really big IBM-esque sort of giant package, right, that I need to install? And I think we're not there anymore, right? Like, people want a little bit of both. There are some pieces of this that have been commoditized. Some of the runtime pieces you can get as a utility. But it turns out that we often need more than just the basics, right? So yes, great. I'm glad that rate limiting can happen. But what happens when I need to do very custom rate limiting based on environmental factors that might be changing on a regular basis? How do I build that into my API gateway? And so we're at a point now, I think, where we're seeing platforms emerge that are programmable platforms. So to try to isolate all of the stuff that can be moving towards utility, moving towards commodity, and offer that as a platform for your custom logic that needs to run on top of it.
Yeah, awesome. Actually, that teases up quite nicely into the next topic. But before we go there, actually, I want one thing on rate limiting I bump into a lot. I don't know if you've seen this and whether this makes sense to you, but I'd say about half of the people I talk to feel they don't really need rate limiting because they don't feel they're going to be a target of an anonymous hack or something. And then the other half are like, oh no, I've realized it's not anonymous I'm worried about. It's my customer with a bad for loop or a bad piece of React code that's going to take down my whole business. Now, I've personally been on the wrong end of this when I launched an API 15 years ago or something, I don't know, at a company in the UK. But I'm kind of surprised by that reaction, honestly. And it's a non-trivial thing to build and to do it well, particularly to make it customizable, like you described at the end there, Kevin. But you actually started to talk about some of the. Sorry, I don't know if you got something you want to say there.
Yeah, I was going to say the biggest offender for rate limiting is internal. It's someone who has a test that's spinning off and hitting a production endpoint accidentally, and nothing stopping it, and it's taking down prod, right? That's what I've seen over the years. It's typically internal. Rate limiting is one of those things that we don't want to think about until the end, but we should really be thinking up front. Is most security concerns. We should be thinking about those a bit earlier. So just feeling what you said.
100%. 100%. You mentioned actually about the sort of the evolution and things becoming more programmable. What do you folks? You've been working with API platforms for a long time. I think over a decade for both of you. What have you seen change over that time, Kevin? I'll let you take this one first. What have you seen? What's the evolution look like so far?
Yeah, so part of my job at Apogee was helping to add some programmability to the platform, right? And we saw that as a customer need, right? Not just as sort of a response to the OSS projects out there, but customers coming to us saying like, hey, we need to add some custom logic to this. Now, it's always been, a bit of a gray area, right? Like you typically don't want too much business logic in your API gateway, at least not for long term, maybe as kind of a stepping stone to something else. But as it turns out, some of these things that should feel pretty basic, like authorization, might not have a very simple role-based access control model or a simple scope-based model, right? Maybe timing is an issue there. Maybe you should only be able to access this between 9 a.m. and 10 p.m. in some time zone. How do you impact your gateway to do that? It's probably not a control that comes out of the box, right? So we started seeing programmability enter through policies, kind of slowly but surely. And that trend, I think, has only continued because as we mature as an industry, the logic behind our gateways is becoming more complex, right? We are hitting use cases that aren't easily defined by a static declarative language, right? We need more controls, we need more levers, more switches, more dials.
100%. And, we won't turn this into like a Zuplo sales pitch at all, but it was definitely one of the key insights that led to us building Zuplo the way we did. In particular, one of my observations when I was working on Azure API Management was the gateway would often get you 80% of where you needed to go. And then as a developer, you wanted to go that last 20% with your superpower, which is the ability to write code, right? Like, let me break out of jail here. And the number of customers I saw standing up another API to sit between the Origin API and the gateway to do that always struck me as insane. And so that was one of the things we tried to solve. Nathan, what have you seen change in the space over the last decade? Going back to when you first used Apogee and Tyke and now exploring Zuplo, what are the things you've seen change, positive and negative?
Yeah, I think the idea of making it more programmable, we've definitely seen a lot. With Apogee, it was, and Tyke to some extent, it was if I needed something specific, I had to go and write the customized middleware, and they support multiple languages, which is always nice. Which is definitely one of the things that I like about what you're doing at Zuplo to make it kind of a first class citizen, sort of instead of an afterthought. I guess the two other things that I've mostly seen, and they're kind of related, but one is starting out when we were looking, they were mostly all cloud-based solutions instead of a self-hosted one, and what's kind of stem from that as well is you get a lot of people talking about the service mesh versus the API gateway, and what one can do versus the other, whether you need both, whether do they control different things. And so that's kind of I've been dealing with that at my current company because we're a Kubernetes shop and we have Istio deployed, and so it's trying to figure out like what should handle what side of the equation. Can they work together? Who should do what?
That's interesting. So tell us a little bit more about how you have decided to sort of, bifurcate the Istio and an API gateway. Like, how do you think about the different roles between a service mesh and an API management?
Yeah, and it's still ongoing, and Istio changes daily, so we're still trying to figure out 100% what the best way. But starting out, we're looking at it from internal east-west, and especially like within the same cluster. Istio is great for handling where it gets a little, and when I say that, I mean things that you want all your workloads to be able to do on the same vein. So authentication, authorizations with policies, a standard one that comes up. How do you do deployments and routing is generally pretty common amongst the different services. So being able to have that in a centralized place has always been nice. Where it gets tricky is when you want to start having inter-cluster communication and also, obviously your external traffic. And that's kind of where we defined the line thus far. And it's worked out great. So I can't complain, but I think there's definitely more improvements to be had to that space.
Got it. Yeah. Totally agree. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Let's actually look at the future now then. So Kevin, coming back to you, we've talked about like how things have evolved over the past. Like, what do you think should be happening in this space over the next few years? What should a brave future look like for API management?
Yeah, so for me, it's real obvious, right? Like I talk to tons of folks who are implementing their strategy today, and see the challenges that they're going through, right? And there are a couple of things here. One of them is that API management is no longer just an operations concern. It used to be like, oh, I'll go modify some policy config, and I'll let my sysadmins or my ops folks go manage that. It's no longer just that. It extends, far beyond that. And again, it's this notion of treating the API like a product that is really taking a foothold. So if I'm treating this API like a product, things that are typically in the runtime are great, but it's just the tip of the iceberg, right? Like I need to start thinking about does the design of my API look like up front, because it's literally the interface that my customers are going to be using, right? So we're starting to see this movement from API runtime management to API lifecycle management. It's starting to pull in everyone into the conversation. So from product managers to developers to testers to ops folks to market.
Oh, I think we lost your audio, Kevin.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can now. Yep. Sorry, just for a second there, just like the last sentence.
Okay, yeah, I don't know where I dropped off. I was on a big spiel. The everyone's getting involved. Who is your API team is a big question, right? And once you answer that question, you realize it spans almost everyone. And so API management as a runtime concern is starting to fade away. Or I should say, as an ops only runtime concern is starting to fade away, and is starting to expand to everyone. Now, with that comes a lot of fear that organizations are having, because how do you manage all of that? And in a lot of ways, that fear has come about because of the explosion of APIs. 10 years ago, we were going into organizations saying, hey, your APIs are more than integration points. They're a business opportunity for you. They're super important. Here's a way to look at them. Nowadays, folks are saying, oh my gosh, it happened overnight. We have so many APIs, we don't know what to do with them, right? We have no management. There's a word called zombie APIs now, APIs that are out there that no one's using, we think, but we don't really have any insights into it. There's shadow APIs, so APIs that are coming up and have no visibility, but like teams are independently creating them for their own needs, right? And so looking at this from like a governance perspective, is huge right now. How do we do discoverability internally? And again, how do we monitor that across the entire life cycle? How do we do design reviews and make sure that we're adhering to that design? So how do we have things like contract testing in there, where like I know whatever my gateway is showing to my end user is actually what we designed and what we built for, right? How do I know I'm not making breaking changes? So kind of, it really snuck up on a lot of big organizations, but we're here now where they're trying to figure out like what's the right level of freedom versus control. And so I think we'll see a lot more of that come out, right? And I don't think it's going to be very top down as it's been in the past. I think it's going to be very decentralized, where teams are becoming more autonomous and they're going to have a say in how things are managed. So it's going to be kind of a compromise between these centers of excellence, between these enterprise architecture teams and these individual, stream-aligned teams that are producing work.
Yeah, there's a few things you said that I think resonate there with things I'm hearing from customers and just folks I talk to in the API space right now. In one particular one I think is good is that where you talked about API being a product, which is kind of what Clearco are doing as well, obviously making it something external people use and strengthens your whole value proposition. Another thing that sort of surprised me, and it shouldn't, I worked at Stripe, which is the sort of gold standard, I think, in many people's eyes for a good API experience. We met with a chap called Arsham from On Call Health, who talked about how the fact in his space he can show quality API documentation and a quality API experience has proved to be a differentiator in their sales calls. They're going head to head with another health company. It's not really an API first company at all, But the minute an engineer sees that this is the API he's going to get to use with this particular vendor, is like, oh, can we please use that one? Because it looks like it's not going to be hell. I mean, these are becoming like really important parts of your product. Nathan, again, having spent some time on this in this space, what would you like to? This is you writing our roadmap here, I guess. What would you like to see in API management platforms over the next over the next few years? How should they be evolving?
Yeah, I really like what both of you are saying, and I 100% agree. When you start looking at it from an API first and an API product perspective, the thing that I think is always missing, and that it shouldn't be, is the documentation. So it's not just things like the documentation portal that is the entry to your API product from a developer's eyes, but also think about it like, what can doing these open API specifications up front and like as part of your source code and your build make happen. And like one of the things that we're doing is making it so that these contract testing that we're talking about can get generated from the open API specifications as you deploy as part of your CI process. So that things like, how can we make it so the feedback loop between you're not really having to bridge the gap between your backend service and your exposed API gateway. Like how can we shorten that feedback loop and make it so that documentation testing is sometimes not an afterthought.
Yeah, this has come up in a few conversations I've had recently with some other potential customers that I'll let them be nameless for now. But very similar thing actually, where it actually speaks to both points. The one Kevin made about this growing number of APIs and trying to manage the chaos, but also having that sensible workflow so that as I make changes, perhaps my open API is generated from my code. How do I then keep the gateway and my documentation in sync with all those in a way that is not only sort of seamless and effortless for the developer, but is also reviewable and governable. And I can ensure that people are sticking to standards and doing a good job. And it's easy to see what the docs are going to look like for V2 long before they go live. So yeah, I think there's an exciting future here, particularly with a developer mindset. One last question for both of you. One observation I have is that API management products are tending to be adopted by larger companies and not by smaller companies or newer startups. It's like much easier. Few folks, small companies are signing up from Apigee, from what I can see, and Tyke and so on. Tends to be the slightly bigger companies. Why do you think that is? Why is API management not found fit with startups yet? Why are they not choosing these solutions? Kevin, do you want to go first? Sorry.
Sure. Yeah. So I was just talking about this, right? Like why are companies, and the problem I think is bigger, or the issue is a little bit bigger, is that a lot of times these companies are not coming out API first, right? They're not thinking about their API as a first level product that they're offering. They're focused on some kind of user experience typically, and they're building for that. And APIs become an afterthought. And it's only once you've hit this inflection point of usage and the needs for an API before you realize, like, oh, we haven't architected this in a way that can even give us a nice API. So let's slap together whatever we can at the end and release it out there. And it's at that point that they start thinking about API management and what that might look like, right? But from the get-go, if you're not an API-focused product as a startup, you're probably not thinking about that API. And part of what we're hoping to do is change that for folks, right? Now, larger API management vendors, I would say it is larger enterprises that are adopting them. But when you look at just gateway solutions that are not sort of the full suite, you've got lots of folks using things like AWS API Gateway. All right, you're already an AWS user. Let me just slap that in front of my Lambda. Ta-da! Right, I've got something there. And you've got folks in sort of the Kubernetes space who are doing things with Nginx and are doing things with Kong. And this is sort of like the baby step into API management, which encompasses, especially API lifecycle management, which encompasses a whole lot more. I think startups are taking these baby steps probably a little bit too late. And as someone who like consults startups on their strategy, I definitely tell that API first story as soon as I can, just to get the wheels turning.
Yeah, it's spot on because I've seen it at all three companies I've been at where they started out at these user products and then all of a sudden they have external vendors that are interested in it. And it's like, well, crap, now we have to go back and retroactively think about how we can turn these routes we've made into an API product and what's that going to look like. And that's when people too late in the process go reaching for an API gateway, but it's only half the battle. Not even half the battle. It's a smaller percentage of it while you have to go back and fix everything. So as long as if you can get in front of it and start going at it from an API first mindset, it's going to make life a lot better in the long run.
Was a perfect note to end on. I'll end there with an amen. That was great. And I think wraps us up on time. So first of all, thanks, Nathan. Thanks, Kevin, for joining us today. It was fun to chat again. It always is fun to chat with you folks. Yeah, that was great. Really, really enjoyed it. And just to finish as well, if you're at that conference attendee next week, we'll be there. Go find my co-founder, Nate, for a demo of Zuplo. And yeah, thanks for joining the call today.
Thanks, Josh, and thanks, Nathan and Kevin. It was hard for me to keep quiet. We have a very large platform, or an effort that's turned into a very large platform just to support our conference. And all the places I've been, people always think of the UI as the end deliverable, and they forget that your API should be the first deliverable to your UI. And here we are, and it's a very easy thing to do. And you mentioned taking it late in the game, and I can't stress enough that people need to treat those APIs like a non-visual user interface. It pays dividends in the long run when you really design it and architect it, and your feature additions come on like nobody's business once it's there. And people just won't invest that time in it. So go do something about it while it's cheap, right?
Yeah.
It's way cheaper in the beginning than it is in the end.
It is better to start out the way you want to carry on. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys for your time. As Josh said, that conference is in days. So look forward to seeing you people. Stop by the Zuplo booth, and that's it. Happy